Tonight, the nation wants to know, how does a small fire become a giant blaze? A war between Iran and Israel, with the United States joining in, would not start from nothing. For many years, these countries have been in a shadow war. They have disagreed on many things, especially Iran's nuclear program. Israel believes Iran is trying to build a nuclear bomb, a weapon that could destroy it. Iran says its program is for peaceful energy. This disagreement is a ticking time bomb. It is a source of deep fear and mistrust. The world has watched this tension grow, hoping it would never explode into open conflict, but the signs have been there for a long time. The first shot could be a precise strike. Imagine this. Israel, feeling that diplomacy has failed, decides it must act. It launches a surprise attack on Iran's nuclear sites. Perhaps it targets places like Natanz or Fordo, which are deep underground. Israel's goal would be to destroy Iran's ability to make a bomb. This would be a very bold move. It would be a direct challenge to the Iranian government. Iran would see this as an act of war. It would not sit silently. The leaders in Tehran would feel they have to respond very strongly to show their power and defend their nation's honor. After an Israeli attack, Iran's response would be swift and powerful. Iran has many ways to fight back. It could launch its own missiles at cities in Israel. It could also use its friends in the region. These friends are groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon or the Houthis in Yemen. They are called proxy forces. Iran could ask these groups to attack Israel from all sides. This would turn a single attack into a much larger regional war. Suddenly, the conflict would not just be between two countries. It would involve many different places and many different fighters, making the situation far more complicated and dangerous for everyone. This is how the fire spreads. What starts as a targeted strike by one nation becomes a full-blown war. Israel would then have to defend itself from missiles and attacks from multiple borders. Iran would continue to fight back, trying to damage Israel as much as possible. The Middle East would be thrown into chaos. Each side would believe it is right. Each side would feel it has no choice but to keep fighting. This dangerous cycle of attack and counterattack could escalate very quickly, pulling in other powerful countries and setting the stage for a much larger and much more devastating global crisis. The world would be watching in fear. The question is simple, ladies and gentlemen. Why would America get involved? The United States is a very close friend of Israel. It has promised to protect Israel's security. If Iran attacks Israel with great force, the United States might feel it has to step in to help its ally. Also, the United States has its own problems with Iran. It also does not want Iran to have nuclear weapons. On June 21, 2025, we saw this happen. President Donald Trump announced that American forces had joined Israel. They conducted airstrikes on 3 of Iran's most important nuclear sites. This was a massive decision. It was a huge step that changed everything. When America joins the fight, the war becomes much bigger. The United States has the most powerful military in the world. It has advanced planes like the B-2 stealth bomber that can reach targets no one else can. In the recent strikes, the United States used these bombers to hit the Fordow nuclear site, which is built deep inside a mountain. Israel could not do this alone. This shows that American involvement brings a new level of destructive power to the conflict. President Trump called the mission very successful, but it also opened a new, very dangerous chapter. The conflict is no longer just regional. It is now a direct confrontation between the United States and Iran. Iran's reaction to an American attack would be very serious. The Iranian leaders have promised to retaliate. They have said they will not be scared. They might attack United States military bases in the Middle East. There are many American soldiers in countries like Iraq, Qatar, and Bahrain. These soldiers would be in great danger. Iran could also use its proxy forces to attack American interests across the region. This would lead to a direct war between United States and Iranian forces, a scenario that leaders have tried to avoid for decades. The risk of a long, bloody, and costly war for the United States would become very real. This escalation would change global politics completely. It is not just a fight anymore. It is a declaration. The United States joining the war sends a message to the whole world. Countries like Russia and China, who are often rivals of the United States, would watch very closely. They might support Iran in different ways, maybe with weapons or money. This could create a dangerous global standoff, similar to the Cold War. The world would be divided into 2 camps: those who support the United States and Israel, and those who support Iran. This would make it very difficult to find a peaceful solution and could lead to even more conflicts around the globe. Let's be very clear tonight. A war involving Iran, Israel, and the United States would set the entire Middle East on fire. This is not an exaggeration. It is a fact. The conflict would not stay inside the borders of Iran and Israel. It would spread like a virus to neighboring countries. Nations like Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen would be pulled into the fighting. These countries are already unstable. They have suffered from years of war and political problems. A new, bigger war would be a complete disaster for them. It would destroy any hope for peace and stability that they might have. The suffering of ordinary people would be immense. Think about the people, the civilians. Millions of innocent men, women, and children would be caught in the middle of the fighting. Cities would be bombed. Homes, schools, and hospitals would be destroyed. People would have to run away from their homes to find safety. This would create a massive refugee crisis. Millions of people would become homeless, searching for food, water, and shelter in neighboring countries. We have seen this before in Syria and Iraq. This new war would create a humanitarian catastrophe on a scale we have not seen in a very long time. The human cost of such a conflict is always the highest price paid. The war would also deepen old wounds and create new hatreds. The Middle East is home to different religious and ethnic groups, like Sunni and Shia Muslims. A war with Iran, a Shia country, could increase tensions with Sunni countries like Saudi Arabia. These divisions could be exploited by extremist groups. Groups like ISIS could use the chaos of war to grow stronger again. They thrive in places where governments are weak and people are scared. A regional war would create the perfect environment for terrorism to flourish, making the entire world less safe. The conflict would plant the seeds of future wars for generations to come. The dream of a modern, peaceful Middle East would die. For years, some countries in the region, like the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, have been trying to build modern economies. They have been investing in technology, tourism, and business. A major war would stop all of this progress. Investors would run away. Trade routes would be closed. The focus would shift from building a better future to simply surviving the present. The entire region would be pushed backward by decades. The hope for a stable and prosperous Middle East would be replaced by the reality of endless conflict, destruction, and despair. Tonight, the focus is on your wallet, your budget, your future. A war in the Middle East would hit the world economy where it hurts the most: oil prices. The Middle East produces a huge amount of the world's oil. Iran itself is a major oil producer. A war would disrupt this supply. Iran could attack oil tankers and facilities in the region. A very important route for oil is the Strait of Hormuz. It is a narrow waterway, and a huge percentage of the world's oil passes through it every day. If Iran closes this strait, it would be like blocking a major artery to the global economy. The flow of oil would slow to a trickle. When the supply of oil goes down, the price goes up. It is simple economics. Experts believe that in a major conflict, the price of a barrel of oil could jump to over $130. This would be a massive shock to the world economy. For a country like India, this would be terrible news. India imports most of its oil. Higher oil prices mean everything becomes more expensive. The cost of petrol and diesel would shoot up. This makes transportation more expensive for farmers, for businesses, and for you. The price of everyday items would increase. This price shock would affect everyone, not just people in India. Higher oil prices mean higher inflation. Inflation is when money buys less than it used to. Your salary stays the same, but you can't buy as much with it. This would hurt families all over the world. People would have less money to spend, which would slow down economies. Businesses might have to lay off workers because their costs are too high. Central banks would find it very difficult to control inflation. They might have to keep interest rates high, making it more expensive for people to borrow money. The global economy is a connected system. A problem in one part of the world can cause problems everywhere else. A war in the Middle East would create immense uncertainty. Investors would be scared. They would sell their stocks, and stock markets around the world could fall. Companies would delay their plans to build new factories or hire new people. Global trade would suffer. This economic pain would not last for just a few weeks. A long war could push the world into a deep recession. The financial security of millions of people would be at risk. Now let's talk about our own. Let's talk about our people. Millions of Indians live and work in the Middle East. They are in countries like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Kuwait. They work hard as doctors, engineers, construction workers, and nurses. They send money back home to their families. This money, called remittances, is very important for the Indian economy. These brave men and women are the backbone of many families back here in India. A war would put them in extreme danger. Their safety would be the biggest concern for the Indian government and for every single one of us. Imagine the chaos. If war breaks out, cities could be attacked with missiles. Airports could be closed, communication lines could be cut. Indian workers would be trapped in a war zone. Their lives would be at risk every single day. They would be far from home, scared for their safety, and worried about their families back in India. The Indian government would face a massive challenge. It would have to find a way to bring millions of its citizens back home safely. This would be a huge evacuation operation, perhaps the largest in history. It would require ships, planes, and a lot of diplomatic effort. Even if they are not in the direct line of fire, Indian workers would face huge problems. The economies of the Middle Eastern countries would be shattered by war. Many companies would shut down. This means many Indians would lose their jobs. They would have no income and no way to support their families. The dream that took them to the Middle East would turn into a nightmare. They would be left with no job, no money, and no easy way to get back home. The personal and financial suffering for these families would be unimaginable. It would be a human tragedy of epic proportions. The Indian government's role would be critical. It would need to act fast. New Delhi would have to talk to all the countries involved to ensure the safety of its citizens. It would need to set up emergency helplines and shelters. The government would have to arrange for special flights and ships to bring people home. We saw this kind of effort during the Gulf War in 1990, when India evacuated over 170,000 people from Kuwait. A new war would require an even bigger and more complex operation. The safety and well-being of every single Indian in the region would become the nation's #1 priority. The world will not just be a spectator. A war of this magnitude forces every nation to take a side or to try and stay out of the fire. The reactions from other powerful countries would shape the future of the conflict. Let's start with Russia and China. They are major world powers and often have different views from the United States. They have closer ties with Iran. They would likely condemn the attacks by the US and Israel. They might try to block any action against Iran at the United Nations Security Council. They could also provide Iran with economic and maybe even military support. This would make the conflict much more complicated and dangerous. European countries like France, Germany, and the United Kingdom would be in a very difficult position. They are allies of the United States, but they have also tried to keep the peace with Iran through diplomacy. They would be very worried about the war spreading and causing a massive refugee crisis. They would likely call for an immediate ceasefire and a return to talks. However, their influence might be limited once the fighting has started. Their main goal would be to de-escalate the conflict, but their voices might be drowned out by the sounds of war. They would be torn between their alliance with the US and their desire for peace. International organizations like the United Nations would be at the center of the diplomatic storm. The UN Secretary General would express deep alarm and call for all sides to show restraint. The Security Council would hold emergency meetings. However, the UN is often powerless when major countries are involved in a conflict. A veto from a permanent member like the US, Russia, or China can stop any resolution. The UN could try to provide humanitarian aid to the victims of the war, but it would struggle to bring about peace when the world's most powerful nations are on opposite sides of the fight. For countries like India, the situation would be extremely delicate. India has good relationships with the United States, Israel, and Iran. It would be a diplomatic tightrope walk. India would not want to take sides. It would push for peace and dialogue. Prime Minister Modi's government would have to protect India's interests, which include the safety of its citizens in the region and the security of its energy supplies. India might try to work with other neutral countries to act as mediators, to try and build a bridge between the warring sides. But in a world divided by war, the voice of peace is often the hardest one to hear. Tonight, after looking at all the facts, the conclusion is clear. The only path forward is the path of peace. A war between Israel, Iran, and the United States would be a catastrophe with no winners. Everyone would lose. The Middle East would be plunged into darkness, its people suffering unimaginable horrors. The world economy would be shaken to its core, hurting ordinary families everywhere. The risk of a wider global conflict, pulling in other major powers, would be terrifyingly real. We have seen the pictures of war. We have heard the stories of loss. We must not allow history to repeat itself on such a devastating scale. The consequences are simply too severe to ignore. We are talking about millions of lives at risk, a global economic crisis, and a world order thrown into chaos. The destruction of cities, the creation of millions of refugees, and the rise of extremism would set the world back for decades. This is not a movie, this is not a game. This is the real world where the decisions of a few leaders can bring misery to billions. The leaders of the United States, Iran, and Israel have a heavy responsibility. They hold the future of the region and perhaps the world in their hands. They must choose wisdom over anger and dialogue over destruction. Peace is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength. It takes more courage to sit down and talk than it does to launch a missile. Diplomacy, negotiation, and understanding are the only tools that can build a lasting peace. There are no military solutions to these deep political problems. Airstrikes cannot destroy an idea. War cannot create trust. The only way to ensure security for Israel, respect for Iran, and stability for the world is through a patient and determined effort to find common ground. Every diplomatic channel must be kept open. Every opportunity for dialogue must be taken. Ultimately, the world must demand peace. The international community must speak with one voice against this war. Citizens in every country, including the US, Iran, and Israel, must call on their leaders to step back from the brink. The stakes are too high for silence. The cost of conflict is too great to bear. Peace is not just an option, it is a necessity for our shared survival. The choice is simple: a future of cooperation and prosperity, or a future of conflict and despair. Let us hope, and let us work, for a future where our children can live in a world free from the shadow of war. That is the only debate that matters.